Okay, today for the UCF podcast, I have Giovanna Pineda, who is a leader in the union on many different levels in the state and our local chapter. So this is a real treat, not only for me, but for everybody here. Giovanna, if I could have you just introduce yourself to everybody.
Oh, hi, I'm Dr. Giovanna Pineda from UCF in the Department of History.
Okay, and the reason I've asked Giovanna here is because she recently had a column or editorial in the Orlando Sentinel about HB 233, the dreaded legislation we all are concerned about, and of course she is, but she took it upon herself to write a column and editorial about the dangers of this piece of legislation. I think we are all grateful to her for that. So, Giovanna, I wanted us to have a conversation about the editorial, where it came from, and your thoughts on the legislation, if you don't mind. So, one thing I want to point out here first is I've been getting emails from people across campus who are concerned about HB 233 and how it might interfere with their teaching and research. Our provost, some other voices have claimed that taking the survey when it's released can prove that universities are not sites of indoctrination. I'm suspicious of that claim, but that's my own personal opinion. In your recent Orlando Sentinel column, you point to the broader problems with this legislation, and specifically this survey. So can you tell us a little bit about your concerns?
Well, my primary concern was that the survey itself, knowing just the faculty when they do other surveys, it causes anxiety. And this type of survey, where it's searching specifically for indoctrination or communist or anything of that sort, it did seem scary to me because people will be afraid. And what if, you have to say, hey, should I be talking about communists in my class? Because then maybe that'll spread the message of communists. If you're teaching Marxist philosophy, maybe I shouldn't be teaching that anymore. But this could go on and on. I mean, it could also be, for instance, in the sciences, like, should I be teaching about Darwinism or evolution, or should I just focus on creationism? So it really affects how we teach. To have something, it's just a survey. It's a form of terrorism. It's a form of the language is there. You start to think and rethink. And I'm just saying, as a faculty member, am I doing the right thing? Am I going to be considered, indoctrinating students because of how I teach my courses? So that was my primary concern. And I started to feel myself, just thinking about it, real fear. And one of the things, as you mentioned, it's not in the article, but kind of my background is my parents were from Guatemala. They left really terrible conditions, like authoritarian military dictatorships, where you couldn't speak your mind. You couldn't speak. You almost felt like even your mind was in prison. And they brought a lot of this to me when I was a child. I was growing up, and I didn't really understand it at the time. I'm just like, oh, you guys are like in prison of your mind or something. But they would say, we need to appreciate that we are raising you here. We made many sacrifices, they will let me know, so that you can say whatever you want, And their joke was always like, well, you're so mouthy, you need to be in the US. You'll be dead anywhere else. But it's a Guatemalan joke. So that was my motivation for writing it. One was I was starting to feel the fear, and then I connected it with my childhood of my parents explaining to me how they felt growing up, just constantly like, I have to shut up, I can't, they were policing themselves constantly. And I guess that's what it leads me to, which is something like a survey where you have to every year think about, who am I? What am I doing in the classroom? It's like you're policing yourself. And then eventually it'll end up for a much more poor education, because maybe the biologist doesn't want to teach, evolution anymore, or changes how they teach so they can focus on creationism. Or the same with the philosopher, like, just forget about teaching Marxists, but what about Buddhists? Buddhists has some similar Buddhist philosophy. And it just gets, I'm talking too much, so I apologize, but it just gets to be way too much, how people can police themselves at all levels.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, I think you're right. And I think if anybody wants the proof of what you're saying, they could just look at Governor DeSantis' statements, various, Republican supporters in Tallahassee of this legislation. They are using, in no uncertain terms, actual threats against the university system, against us. So, I mean, there's reason to be concerned in the way that you're describing it. I'm glad you said something. I'm glad you brought this out. So I know, we're both historians, and we can't help but put things into a broader context. And I think that's the one thing I really liked about your column, is you're taking this legislation, you're putting into a broader context, and not just a national context, I think, but a global context. And so, for me, like, if I were to write combat HB 233, I would have fell back on the McCarthyism kind of stuff. It'd been a little bit more provincial than you were with this article, by looking at the writings of Hannah Arendt. So what lessons can we learn about what's happening to us in the classroom in Florida by opening ourselves up to these perspectives outside our borders?
Um, Definitely looking historically, looking back. One of the things I was following, just for as a hobby, is fun. I'm reading Hannah Arendt, and but then also her circle. So I was reading about her in particular and her life, and just understanding, like, she was an intellectual, and she would have started writing in her 30s after her, getting her PhD and everything. But for 20 years, she was basically running away from different totalitarian governments. But one, of course, the main one, of course, is the Nazis in the 1930s and 40s, just trying to fight from there. And then going from one refugee camp to another. And all of this helped develop her, like, thinking. And she's running away from Nazis, finally getting to the United States. As I read her story, I thought more about, like, everywhere she stopped, she always connected with the intellectual communities. Now, one of the reasons why she was constantly chased is because she couldn't stop writing, like, even just minor things, or researching anti-Zionism and all of that. And I think how her life could apply to us in several ways. One is being aware of what something like HB 233 could do to all professors, right? Also, one thing that I noticed in her life, and then all the other, even Heidegger was involved with this, and she had other, like, intellectual influences, was that the intellectuals have to stand up, because if we don't, who will? And so, that was basically in my reading of all of this, was that we have to say something. If we see, so for instance, like, if we're too afraid, if we become too afraid, we're not going to speak up anymore. We're just going to say, like in a lot of military dictatorships, the professors, the intellectuals just say whatever the boss wants them to say, or the dictator. And one of the reasons, as a faculty member, being a pain in the ass is a good thing, because it means you are creating new ideas, you continue to be creative, you are fighting against a system that could be wrong. And another thing is to pay attention to, what can this survey do long term? And I guess as historians, that's probably how you saw it immediately, like, oh my God, this is scary, even when they were debating it in the Congress. And I actually had called my congressman, other Floridian congressmen, like, please do not pass this. And, but I made myself known, hi, I'm Giovanna Pineda. I am one of your constituents. And, one of our political House bill leaders, or, he talked to me for 45 minutes trying to convince me that I was somehow wrong, and he was right. It's like, oh, no, this will be a good thing. And I know some professors, like the UF professor who was interviewed in the Rolling Stone, he believes, oh, it'll be a good thing because it will prove we're not indoctrinated. That might be an outcome to an end, but by the time you get to that point, you've already ruined it. I mean, your best minds are not going to stay in a place like Florida in the state university system, because they're going to be like, you know what? I don't need to be policing myself. This energy that we use to police ourselves, we could be using to write and create new things, and just become a more, if you want to call it neoliberal terms, and I did mention that, it's like, we want to have ideas flowing everywhere so we can have this global marketplace, if you want to think of it that way. The other way, if you want to think of it, but that's the whole point, right? It's not a binary. It's like, let's think in all different ways. Let's have as many ideas as possible. And something like HB 233 survey, where it's inhibiting. It's just the survey itself is what's going to cause the anxiety and limit independent thought. And the worst thing, and I've seen it for some faculty when they become so afraid, is like, well, how do they want me to answer this? And then eventually, if you keep answering it the same way, or how others want you to answer it, you become the other. You're no longer yourself. And when you lose that, you lose also all that creativity that makes intellectuals and faculty very important to a university system.
Yeah, no, that's very true. Now, if we could kind of switch gears and talk about some other parts of the legislation that's not the survey, and the other thing, the other thing obviously concern is the recording of professors, and we'll probably get to that in another podcast. But what I wanted to mention that I guess is the third part of the survey that's not getting as much attention is the idea of campuses being open up to anybody. Because what people don't realize, like the modern university campus, all spaces, commerce now, right? Like anybody with money can rent an auditorium, can rent space, or what have you. And over the years, there's some universities who have been kind of putting conditions on the rental of space, let's say, because if someone wants to come in and rent space that doesn't kind of conform to the mission of the university, that sometimes they're declined, but they're more than welcome to come on campus into the greens or the plaza or whatever and talk to people. They just don't have the privilege of renting a space. So it could be as innocuous as flat earthers, right? Like, why would a university want a flat earth person coming in to speak to the students? I mean, it's innocuous, but hey, go out in front of the student union or something and talk to students about flat earth. You don't need to rent an auditorium to do that, and people probably wouldn't say anything. But when it came to things like Richard Spencer, and his kind of suit and tie version of ethnic cleansing, right? That certainly doesn't have a place, I think, on a university campus. We don't have to debate ethnic cleansing, or what he describes as racialism, as opposed to racism. I don't think the university needs to subsidize that conversation. That conversation could take place on the greens, in the plaza, in the quote unquote free speech zone so many campuses have. Yet this very legislation would allow any group, even the Ku Klux Klan, to come to any campus and say, I want to rent this space. And the university cannot say no to the Ku Klux Klan with this piece of legislation. So do you have similar concerns with these other parts of HB 233 that's not getting the same attention as the survey or the recording of classrooms are?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, I definitely have a lot of concern about that one. That one was one that was not, yeah, like you said, not as well talked about. The other thing too that I was thinking about it was, it's about the groups themselves. So it's not being against perhaps the Ku Klux Klan, or okay, they want to speak on campus. They should be able to speak on campus. You're right, in the free speech zones. Now, if they want to rent auditorium, they can rent the auditorium. The issue, however, with these groups is always that they bring a lot of violence with them. They're already coming in with a really bad attitude. Like, they're coming in like, we're going to go kick ass, and anyone gets in our way, protesters will beat up. And, and I've seen it. Not that long ago in 2016, when Trump came, like, there was just whoever Trump attracted came out and started like hurting some of our students. Our students were being students. They were protesting. They didn't want this on campus. I mean, we are the most diverse campus in the United States. Like, yes, we're like, what are we now? 52% non-white. Like, so, yeah, I mean, so it's, when they come on our campus, it's not so much their speech. Yes, you have your hate speech, and yes, I've heard it all. They always have something. They hate women, they hate blacks, they hate Latinos, they hate everybody. Okay, fine. You're just angry white people, so like, go do your thing. But the problem is the hate groups that they bring along, or just the angry people that come ready to kick ass, ready to cause violence. And this is not too long ago either. 2020, like not just the Proud Boys that were on our street corner every Saturday morning, but also on campus. I forget which group it was, but it was supposed to be the one. It was led by a woman. I don't know if you remember her name. But when she came on campus, some students were they didn't want her on campus.
Oh,
because
yeah. I know what
yeah,
you're talking about. Yeah. The blonde woman, I think. Right?
the blonde woman. Yeah. And the thing is, she came with camera crews. She came with
And,
bodyguards,
and,
also
and,
with some
and she also said she
thugs.
was doing something else than what she was actually doing, right?
Yes, yes.
Yeah.
So she lied. So that's what I mean. So it's like, okay, you want to come on campus. For instance, I'm not a religious person, and I have in the free speech zone are the Jesus people screaming whore to the young girls. And, I'm not in favor of that, but I understand it's in the free speech zone. Uh, but these groups that come, at least the ones that are especially the white, I want to call them the white supremacist groups, or this, what would you call them?
Well, I would call, Richard Spencer white supremacist and the
Yeah.
Proud Boys, and
Yeah.
I don't know that they only Tucker Carlson takes exception to being called a white supremacist. The rest of them don't seem to.
They don't seem to mind. So
Yeah.
yes, not trying to be drugged. I'm just trying to say that they come on campus ready to hurt somebody. And that's the problem. And that's where, if, let's say Richard Spencer comes on campus, well, fine, come in your suit and tie, bring your suit, bring your most well-mannered crew with you, and expect there's going to be protests, but that's like normal. Just be normal. Don't come on campus here to beat up people.
Right. And, the other issue in here too, because, I followed the Richard Spencer thing at UF when it happened, is that, and I know this is true at other university campuses, the money and the people who have the money who support his tour and buy the space on campus for him to speak, do not disclose who they are.
Oh, see, that's another issue. Yeah.
So it'd be nice as well. Who's sponsoring? And that we don't get access to that. We just get Richard Spencer.
Yeah.
So
that's
it's
another
like
thing too. Vetting. This is part of the process. Like, okay, make it transparent. You're white supremacist. You're here. You want to be totally normal. Tell us who's funding you. No big deal.
Sure. Yeah, it should be, but apparently it is not at the moment. So for those who didn't catch the legislature in action this past winter and spring, this same legislature will meet in Tallahassee in the spring of 2022 for the second part of this term. Do you have a sense of what might be coming in this second session that will impact our workplace and classrooms?
Well, there was a couple things that didn't pass, but which were just equally as awful. So I think they're going to revive that. I mean, the main one they want to get rid of is the unions. They want to attack the unions. They want to make sure, for instance, like our automatic deduction won't be automatically deducted anymore. That was one of it. So that would just cause just staffing. So that's not so bad. That's not the worst of it. The other one is also having 50% decertification. So if you're not at 50% of membership, then you're decertified. And to be decertified means like the union ends, the collective bargaining agreement, the one faculty contract we have, gone. All of that is gone. And then you have to reinstate yourself. And that's a huge legal process. I mean, they're basically just trying to break down the unions.
Yeah. I mean, I think we were sort of by the skin of our teeth in the last session, right?
Yeah, no, it was all very close. There were a lot of other things too. I mean, and all of it is just extreme forms of control over the human, the body. It's just, I wish they could just see that. but it's just intentional. They do want to control us. That's what it feels like.
Right. And, those of us who teach at public state colleges and universities were a specific target. I would imagine we're going to be a target again, right?
Oh, yes, we definitely will. For whatever reason, they hate faculty, university professors.
Because we're all Marxists. We're all.
Yes.
I mean that kidding. I'm joking.
I know.
Anybody that's listening to this and going to say, here's the proof. Robert Castano said they're all Marxists. Well, Dr. Pineda, I thank you again for joining me, and I'm going to put your column in the description of this podcast. If anybody wants to read it, they will be able to click the link, and hopefully it will not be behind a paywall. I think you get 5 free Orlando Sentinel articles a month. So if you're in that position, just come back when the month starts again and get your use one of your free Orlando Sentinel articles on Giovanna's column. You will not be disappointed.
Thank you very much.
All right, Giovanna, thank you again for taking the time out to talk to me.
Thank you. Bye.